Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again tomorrow. It's Friday. We are at the end of the holiday of Sukkot, where today is Hoshana Rabbah, the finale, and we are going to be entering tonight Shmini Atzeret. And I want to talk about what do we celebrate Sukkot for? A lot of people, when you ask them, why do we celebrate Passover, they'll tell you easily, we came out of Egypt, we're celebrating our redemption from slavery. The holiday of Shavuot was celebrating the receiving of the Torah. Those are very, very clear-cut reasons why. But the holiday of Sukkot seems to be a little bit, it's not as clear as the other holidays. And it's a very, very tremendous amount of sources regarding why do we celebrate Sukkot, or really what the deep meaning behind the Sukkot. And I want to reveal some of these secrets, some of these explanations behind Sukkah. Why do we celebrate the holiday of Sukkot? And I want to begin, if we look in the Torah in Leviticus, in Vayikra, Parshat Emor, Leviticus chapter 23, verses 42 and 43. And there the Torah seems to be very clear. It says, B'Sukkot teishvu shivat yamim, you shall dwell in the Sukkah 7 days. Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael, every ezrach, every citizen of Israel, yeshvu b'Sukkot. So first, that's the commandment that we must dwell in the Sukkot. Number 43, Leman Yedu Dorotechem. 43 is the reason why do we have to live in the Sukkah for 7 days. So the generations will know. Ki b'Sukkot hoshavti et bnei Yisrael, that I have placed the children of Israel in the Sukkot. Botzi otam me'eretz Mitzrayim, I took them out of Egypt. Ani Hashem Elokechem, I am Hashem your God. So here we see the reason is so the generations later on will know that God placed us inside the Sukkot when He took us out of Egypt. Okay, so now the verse 43 revealed to us why do we celebrate Sukkot? Because God placed us in the Sukkot. We left Egypt. And the question is, where do we see that basically? Where do we see in the Torah itself that God placed us in the Sukkah? And if you look in Exodus chapter 12, verse number 37, and it says, right after we leave Egypt, it says, Vayisu b'nei Yisrael meRamses. Israel traveled away from a place in Egypt called Ramses, and they came to Sukkota. They came to a place called Sukkota. And here we see right away that the word Sukkota, mentioned as a name of a place, but it's also a reference. The reason it's called Sukkot, because that's where they began to go inside the Sukkot. But what was the Sukkah exactly? And if we look in the Talmud, in the Gemara, it talks about two very, very famous explanations. Why do we celebrate Sukkot? The Talmud brings down Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. One says that we celebrate Sukkot because we actually were placed inside the clouds of glory. The clouds of glory were the Sukkot for us. The other explanation is that we were physically dwelling inside a physical sukkah, like a booth, some kind of tent. And those are the two explanations of why we celebrate the holiday. So we see there are two different explanations. One says we're celebrating the clouds of glory, and one says we're celebrating being inside the tent, a physical tent. And if we look in Exodus chapter 13, verse number 20, it says, Vayisu Sukkot, they traveled from Sukkot, Vayachanu be'eitan b'ksei hamidbar, they came to a place called Eitam, at the corner of the desert. And then it says in verse number 21, Vashem holech lifnechem, God went before them, Yomam, during the day, ba'amud anan, with a cloud of glory, Lanchotam haderech, to give them direction, V'layla ba'amud esh la'ilem, and at night the cloud was replaced with another cloud of fire that lit up the desert for them. They had to travel a lot of times at night. And verse number 22, it says, Lo yamish amud ha'anan yomam v'amud ha'esh halayla lifnei am. It says the amud ha'anan would not leave them during the day. And in other words, until the cloud of the evening cloud that lit up the desert for them, replaced it, the cloud of, we call the cloud of fire. So anyway, we see right away very clearly in those verses that when they came out of Sukkot, right, that's where the name of the place is always after the event, we see that there's Sukkot that the Torah is very clearly referring to seems to be the clouds of glory that were covering. It wasn't like they were in a physical sukkah that we're celebrating the holiday of Sukkot, but we're really celebrating for the cloud, the miracle of the clouds of glory that were hovering over Israel when they left Egypt. And this was a process that lasted for, of course, 40 years. Now the question is, were there also, besides clouds, according to this opinion, because I said before there are two opinions, some say we're celebrating the physical structure of a tent, and we were inside physical booths, and others say it was the clouds of glory. So according to the opinion that it was a physical tent that we were in, and according to the opinion that says it was clouds of glory, we have two questions to ask. Do all agree with the other one? In other words, is there agreement that there were, you can't argue that there were clouds of glory. For sure they were, because the Torah says it directly. And on the other hand, we can't argue that there were tents, because we see, it says in Numbers, chapter 24 comes to mind, verse 5, where it says, Ma tovu alecha Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael. When Bilam, the whole story is giving the prophecies in Parshat Balak, he says how the tents of Israel, that they're very modest in the way the entrance of the tents of Israel not facing one another in modesty. So obviously there were tents, and there are other sources. I just brought down one, because we see it also in the chapter of Korach, that they met at the tent. But whatever it was, there are other sources in the Chumash, in the Torah, that it was clear that they had physical tents as well. So there's not an argument in reality whether there were physical tents or whether were the clouds of glory, that there are 100% proof to both of them in the Torah. But the question is, why are we celebrating? One focuses on the clouds of glory. That's the reason we're celebrating the holiday, and which seems very, very natural from the verses, that we came out of Egypt right away into a place called Sukkot after Ramses, and then we had the clouds of glory right there. So that seems to be the powerful reason, perhaps, why we're celebrating. But no, but others say, in the Talmud I said this, others say, no, we're celebrating over the tents. But what was the big thing? If these are regular tents, it wasn't really a miracle, so why do we celebrate? And the answer is very simple. Simply is that the fact that we weren't in permanent dwellings, we weren't in strong homes, we were in these very, very weak sukkot, or these tents. So the fact that we were able to survive that way for all those years, for 40 years, is a miracle in itself. And that's why we're celebrating those tents. And so that was a miracle. So at least it showed the divine providence. Obviously, there were miracles. Sometimes there were miracles that are outright or revealed. Sometimes miracles hidden. But we're celebrating the fact that we were in a tent. Those are the two angles. And again, the commentaries, you can look at the commentaries and bring down them. They're all brought down. And they're fascinating to see the different, the different explanations involved. But one thing that came to mind was bothering a lot. If we think about it, the 40 years in the desert, we weren't supposed to be wandering 40 years in the desert. We were supposed to be on the way to the land of Israel, to the goal. And if that's the case, so in reality, the miracles of God taking care of us in the clouds of glory, I can understand that in the beginning, right? Because that was a great miracle. And right away coming Egypt, God had us covered with the cloud. Okay, so we're celebrating that. But the fact that this miracle had to continue for 40 years was only because of our bad behavior. We needed that miracle. So it sort of reminds us of the 40 years of desert traveling that really wasn't supposed to be. And it only came about because of our bad behavior. On the other side, if it was a physical tent as well, in the beginning we came out of Egypt, again, that wouldn't be enough reason for 40 years. 40 years really makes it stand out, the miracle of God taking care of all those years, but sleeping in a couple of tents for a few days until we got to, or whatever it was, a few months, you could say, until we were supposed to reach the land of Israel. It was supposed to be right away, immediately after receiving Torah. As we all know, we were supposed to be heading towards the land of Israel very, very quickly, but we were delayed because of the sin of the golden calf, and later on because of the sin of the spies, which really caused the major delay. But whatever it was, the time was delayed to come to the land. And therefore, the reason of celebrating a tent was really something, as I said before, whether it's the clouds of glory or the tent for 40 years, was only like a necessity because of the way Israel was, the Israel sinned, basically. So it seems a little weird to make a holiday over that. because it was something b'diavad, something that was only, as a no choice kind of thing. But I found an amazing explanation, another explanation which was fascinating. It's brought down by Balu Rokeach, one of the middle-aged great rabbis from Worms, Ashkenaz from Germany, in 1100s, and he writes, he quotes an explanation which is based on the Gaonic period, a very, very early explanation, and giving a whole other outlook into the whole celebration of Sukkot, where he says that we're celebrating not the tents that we had throughout the 40 years, that whole period. He goes, that we don't celebrate. That's not the reason we're celebrating Sukkot. But he says specific kind of tents. What kind of tents? And this, of course, doesn't contradict the clouds of glory. They were there, but we're not celebrating that either. We're celebrating when we came out of the clouds of glory. In other words, we had to enter tents during the desert. Towards the 40th, he says, the 40th year of the desert. What kind of tents is he referring to? He's referring to the tents of battle. When we had to go into the battle, we have we have to sleep in the field, the battlefield. We were fighting against Og and Sichon. Sichon, the king of the Amorites, and Og, the king of Bashan, which was the beginning of the capturing of the land of Israel. That was the other side of the Jordan, which became the portions of Reuven, Gad, and the half of the tribe of Menashe. So he's saying we are celebrating the tents of battle. And that was really the 40th year. But, and why does it say then, so he tries to deal with the difficulty. The verse says, we came out of Egypt. But the point is, we're still referring to Egypt until we enter the land of Israel. So his conclusion is fascinating, that the celebration of that was the beginning of the capturing the land of Israel. And of course it continued, and that's why he says, if you look in the book of Nehemiah, which is really, really fascinating to see it, in chapter 8 of the book of Nehemiah, as we say, it says something like this, and I'm going to quote you the verse. It says, I'll bring down, we'll read verse number, it's beautiful verses, maybe I should read them all, a few of them. It says like this, it says, Bayom HaSheni Nesu Rashi Avot, on the second day, the heads of the fathers, the Rashi Avot, of the families got together, the priests and the Levites, and they came to Ezra's Sofer, they came to Ezra, to listen to Torah, right? Naskil el divrei Torah, to listen to Torah lesson. Vayimtzu katuv b'Torah, and they found, they were surprised, it says in the Torah that God commanded Moshe Rabbeinu, what God commanded them? That they must dwell in Israel in the Sukkot on the holiday, on the 7th month. So they were surprised. They found there's a law, we have to live in the Sukkot. And so they gave a whole announce in Jerusalem saying, go out to the mountains, to bring, tell them to bring all kinds of schach, right? The roof is called the schach, for the sealing of the sukkah, to bring alei zayit and to bring eitz shemen, different kinds of trees. Here we see the source of bringing the palms. They put palms as a lot of people use for the roofs of the sukkah. And then he says, Valei eitz avod, lasot sukkah kakatuv. So they're talking about bringing the materials to make a sukkah according to Jewish law. He says, sukkot kakatuv. Right? The way it's written in the Torah, we must make sukkot. Now, and here you can say, of course, a hint of the oral law, because it doesn't say in the Torah how we make the sukkah, but here it's hinting, right, that they're saying the way it says we must make the roof of the sukkah out of things that are grown in the ground. That's written in our oral law, of course. But of course, he's referring to the verse itself, the commandment of making sukkah that they discovered. But anyway, and then so the nation went out and they made sukkot. Ish al gago, everyone on the rooftop, b'chatzreihem, b'chatzot beit Elohim, u'berchov shar hamayim, talking about they actually made it in different places and whatever. And then this last verse is really what I wanted to focus on, in verse number 17, again in chapter 8 of Nehemiah. In English he says, Vayasu kol hakahal hashavim min hashavi sukkot. All the nation made sukkot. They came back from Shavi, from the exile, from captivity. Vayeshvu b'Sukkot ki lo asu mimei Yoshua. They didn't make Sukkot since the times of Yehoshua ben Nun, Joshua. Now what does it mean? Ad hayomu, until that very day. V'tihi simcha gedola mod. Now that's a little strange. What do you mean they didn't make Sukkot until the times of Joshua? Of course they made Simchot. There were many throughout the generations, but the answer is Sukkot didn't celebrate such a beautiful celebration like the times of Joshua. Now here, the Rokeach, as I said before, that great commentary that's quoting the Gaonic period, he says, here's a very deep meaning, is that the Sukkot that we're celebrating, as we said, for the battlefield of capturing the land of Israel, that's why they're quoting here Joshua, because Joshua was the one who led the capture of the land of Israel, of all of Israel. So that's why the celebration was greater than any other celebration, because that really is the purpose of this remembering Sukkot. That's remembering the land of Israel, the capturing the land of Israel, the battle over the land of Israel. Now, if we take this to another stage forward, and we look at, again, reflect back on the 3 holidays. So we have one holiday, Pesach, coming out of Egypt. But we're still in limbo, of course. We're not in our land. The holiday of Shavuot, which is receiving Torah. So now we have our Torah. We came out of Egypt, but what are we missing? We're missing the land of Israel. So we see how Sukkot must reflect, of course, the land of Israel. And that's a beautiful connection of Sukkot to the land of Israel. Is fascinating. And if we go on, and I want to show you, we see that this is so perfect, because how Sukkot is connected to the land of Israel and the Beit HaMikdash and the temple. If we look in Amos the prophet brings down a verse in chapter 9. He brings down, he says, Bayom hahu akim et Sukkot David hanofelet. On that day, I will set up and establish Sukkot David, the Sukkah of David HaMelech, that is fallen down. Okay? So we see here that Amos the prophet talks about the time of redemption, that God will set up the Sukkah of King David. Now what is he referring to? The Targum Yonatan right away says he's talking about setting up the kingdom of King David again. Right? This is Messianic times, when King David comes back. Obviously the throne of David, we're talking about the end of days when we rebuild our temple and all that time. We're all looking forward for that great time when the throne of David will be restored. Right? King David, as we all know, from his children, from his progeny, eventually will come out a king over Israel, which will be the Messiah, which will lead all of Israel, which will be a tremendous king of holiness and a great, great prophet. And that is being hinted here on Sukkot. It's connected to Sukkot. So if we take that concept and we go and we also look, and it's fascinating, there's a verse in Psalms, and I want to bring another verse in Psalms which relates to Sukkah as a temple. If we look in Psalms chapter 76, verse 3, it says, Vayhi b'shalem Sukkot umonato b'tzion. It says, Vayhi b'shalem. Shalem, in the old way of calling Jerusalem, it was called the Shalem. Right? Shalem. Vayhi b'shalem Sukkot. And it said, when it will be that within Jerusalem there will be God's Sukkah. What kind of Sukkah God has? That's the temple. Umonato, and his dwelling place in Zion, in Jerusalem. So here we see something fascinating, is that the Psalm, King David is relating to the Sukkah of the Beit HaMikdash, the temple as the Sukkah. That's the Sukkah that has fallen in Amos, that we want to pick up again, the Malchut of King David. And so we see that the whole building of the land of Israel, that third final stage, how we build the kingdom of God in the land of Israel, is related to the holiday of Sukkot. The Gaon of Vilna said, fascinating is that there are 2 commandments in the Torah that we go into them with all our bodies and souls, everything. What is that? That is the land of Israel. We enter the land and we're living in the land. So only in the land of Israel you're fulfilling the mitzvah with your entire being. And the Sukkah, we enter the Sukkah, you're fulfilling a beautiful mitzvah of dwelling in that Sukkah, dwelling in that abode. So you see how the connection, of course, to the land of Israel, it's fascinating how that is so powerful and it speaks right out to us. That's what the Vilna Gaon says. And the Vilna Gaon goes on to say something fascinating, that we know a Sukkah has to be built. You can't rely on something that let's say if something fell down, an accident and some kind of a tree fell off and it broke and it formed the Sukkah by itself. In other words, it has to be something that you build. That can't be a Sukkah that just, falls into place by itself. It has to be built by you. You have to be involved in something called Taseh V'lo Min Ha'asui. You have to build it, and it shouldn't be already built. And therefore, if a sukkah is standing all year, you have to shake the schach. You got to do something to reinstate the building of the sukkah. So the whole preparation of building the sukkah is part of the process. And that's what the Vilna Gaon is saying. That therefore, the sukkah is connected to the land of Israel. We must build a land of Israel. The Messiah is not going to come. We're not going to reach our final redemption unless we're involved actively in building the land of Israel. And that here we see again, so we go back to the verse and we see, wow, the sukkah is connected intrinsically to the land of Israel. And that's really, if we think about it, we just finished the high holidays where they were full of lights, very, very powerful lights. And those lights are so strong, as we all know, we need to have something called the tzimtzum, something to have a little shade, because we can't survive when there's too strong of a light, right? And God says at the end of days He will take out the sun out of its naltik, out of its shield, and the evil will be destroyed, and the righteous will bask in the light. The light represents, of course, the light of divine, and therefore the high holidays were like on this tremendously high wavelength, and we need to be sort of protected after that, and we need to have a tzimtzum, a little lowering down of the lights, and try to ground again to the physical world. That's through the sukkah, which has the shade. The shade of the sukkah represents the tzimtzum, the lights being focused in a very measured way that we can handle it. And that's why the sukkah is really our protection, right? It protects us. It is something that God is giving us a shield, a very powerful shield, that He is with us. If we look at in the prayers we say every day, we say, Melech, God is the king. Ozer, who helps us. Right? Melech, Ozer, Umoshiach, brings us our salvation. Right? Melech, Ozer, Umoshiach, Umagen. So there are different concepts. One is God is called the king over us. Then He's called the one who helps us. Then He's called the one who brings us salvation. Then God was called the one who was our shield. There are 4 levels that are mentioned in the prayers when we say the 18 benedictions. And I saw many years back, I remember reading a commentary by Rav Aryeh Kaplan Zitzal, and he wrote something interesting, that when you're looking at a king, you're looking from a distance. Because that's, you have to, that king, right away, you're afraid of the king, you stand back. And then there's another stage, Ozer, he helps you. So when he helps you already, you feel more of a closeness relationship. You're getting closer. But what's beyond helping, then you have Moshiach, He brings you salvation. He's saving you from something. And that's another level, of course. You feel God's salvation. Someone's in a tremendous challenge or a bind, and all of a sudden he comes out of it. And he feels God's hand over him. That's called the salvation. And it's fascinating, on Sukkot, we're so involved. Today was Hoshana Rabbah. We kept saying, Hoshana, the way Sfarim say, the way we say, Ashkenazim say a little, we have a different nigun. But Hoshana we're shouting out to God to save us, right? To bring us to salvation. And then there's the final stage, which is called the Magen. God's your shield. The shield is literally on top of you. When you feel God's presence upon you, that's the shield. And the Sukkot relates to those two concepts of the Hoshiah, of bringing the salvation upon us, and the shield, because that, of course, is again, we spoke about it, that God, at the end of days, will bring us restore our temple, and be our shield, cover us over with the clouds, with His glory, as it says in Isaiah. Talks about that in detail. So if we look at all these concepts, we see how the Sukkah reflects more than anything the divine providence, the divine protection, and how God watches over us. And after the great lights, we are now being shielded, and we're feeling that closeness in a way that we can, of course, bring it to our physical world. That's how we have the beautiful meals in the Sukkah, and celebrate with it, rejoicing in the Sukkah. That's how things reach, that's how we are coming full circle over here. And that's really the powerful message behind why we're celebrating Sukkot, getting back to it. The clouds of glory, that's one's aspect of the divine lights that hovered over us. But together with that, we need the physical side. We need the side of the land of Israel, which is becoming to a physical land where we build, where we have to have the challenges of capturing the land and sowing the land and reaping the fruit of the land and building a physical country. Both are work together. It's not like one reason rules out the other reason, but it's a combination, of course. We can look at them as a combination of two sides of the picture. And that's why the Sukkah reflects the land of Israel, so as we spoke before. But in even a more deeper light, we see something fascinating. Every time the concept of Sukkah comes up in the Torah, it's always, as there's a juxtaposition over here, there's always another side where we see Esav, the Edomite side, lifting up its head. And I can bring many examples, and I don't want to go to too many examples. I just want to, because there are, every time if you look up, take a search in the Bible of Sukkah, you see how the physical side comes up literally connected to the word Sukkah. And I'll give you an example. Coming out of Egypt, which is the most physical side of the Egyptians, the chomil, the materialism, the husks and the shells. Right when we go into Sukkot, we're entering a spiritual realm. Sukkot represents a spiritual realm. It says regarding Jacob, as we all know the famous verse regarding Jacob, Jacob comes out of being with his brother Esav in Mesopotamia. Don't forget, when he comes back to the land of Israel. Well, he was out with Esav, and Esav was in the land of Edom, whatever, he meets up with Esav. And then Jacob comes to Sukkot, as you recall, and then he comes to Shalem, the land of Shechem right over here, which is also called Shalem. There's a certain aspect connecting to Jerusalem over here, and I'll talk about it. It's another lesson in itself. So we see again, after getting away from Esav, the Edomites, right away the Sukkah comes up. We see something very interesting as well. King David represents the Sukkah, has to deal with a war. We know at the end of days, right? Messiah is going to have to deal with the war. Part of the process, dealing the war of Gog and Magog, the war of Armageddon. Now, Gog in Hebrew has the two letters Gog, meaning the roof. The roof is something that opposes the Sukkah. Why? Because a roof is something that totally shields out the light. You don't look at the heavens. A Sukkah, kosher Sukkah, has the lights. Has an opening. You can look out at the heavens and connect to the heavens and understand that there's a God in the universe. So what we have to contend with the end of days is the forces of the Edomite materialistic forces, that this culture that is trying to come against the culture of Torah. As we all familiar with what's going on, this progressive liberal culture of the world that is running away from the Torah and trying to annihilate the Torah. And that is like the Gog, Magog. That's like the battle at the end of days. It's a spiritual battle more than anything. That we have to overcome that. And that is the rooftop, the Gog. And why do I say King David? As we all know, if we look in what's it called, in Samuel, and it was in the evening time, and King David was on his bed, and then he sees on the rooftop a woman washing the roof. That caused his fall. That was Bathsheba, the terrible thing, the sin that David committed. Again, it wasn't adultery according to the way the rabbis teach us in the Talmud, is that everyone gives a divorce, but it was a terrible thing. It was a terrible sin which caused him never to be the same anymore. So the challenge that King David had to face was the rooftop. That was the Gog. That was the influence of the foreign influences that overcome that evil in the world from the Edomite. It's all connected. So the war of Armageddon, Gog and Magog, is connected to the overcoming the rooftop, the Sukkah, which is an open roof, right? Just putting on very light schach over it that we can see the stars, showing our connection to faith in God and allowing spirituality to enter our lives and with the Tzimtzum. And that is really one of the powerful messages, of course, of the Hallel. That's why in the Sukkot we read about the end of days, the war, the great war at the end of days of Gog and Magog. We read about it in chapter 14 of Zechariah. And this connects, of course, to that whole concept. So the Sukkah is our mini temple. We're entering the Sukkah. We're connecting to the concept of Zion, of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, which is our final goal, building the kingdom of Hashem in the land. We will have, again, Malchut Beit David, the kingdom of David will arise again in the land, and prophecy will return, and we will merit in redemption. So Sukkah is so powerful to finish up what was started, to reach that stage of building a complete kingdom of Hashem in the land. And that is why we're celebrating Sukkot. There's a lot more here. I just wanted to touch upon a few important points that I thought maybe will lighten up your holiday to understand. And now we are entering tonight Simchat Torah, celebrating over completion of the Torah, which is of course, our spiritual connection to Hashem, which brings us and allows us to build the land and do all the physical things in this world. We're spiritually connected, and we will do the Hakafot. We will dance with the Torah, and we will have a special holiday of commemorating, again, God's love for His people, and we will merit in building our Beit HaMikdash very soon. Speedily nowadays. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach, Besorot Tovot.